Hi, welcome everyone. We're here together. Welcome everyone here in the room. Welcome everyone watching online. Very happy that you're with us as well. My name is Lynn Zebeda, and I have the honor and the pleasure of moderating the conversation tonight about something so fascinating. How are you today? Before we dive in. Dive in deep. We're good? Happy human here. Nice. Great. Because indeed, this evening is very much about diving deep in all ways into this emerging industry that does not exist yet today, deep sea mining. And this evening is created in collaboration with, of course, Pakhuis de Zwijger and Trouw, because it's such an interesting moment. This industry is eager to take off, and the story is that deep sea mining is important for the precious minerals that we can use for the energy transition. It's also an ecosystem that for millions or billions of years has remained untouched by humans. So can we still defend the deep, or what is happening exactly here? So we're here with I'm very impressed and happy with the panel of experts that is here, experts and advocates for this unknown ecosystem. So I'm just curious to hear from you. Is anyone who knows everything about the technical aspects and the impacts of deep sea mining? Nobody? Not even my panelists? You know some of it? Yeah? Okay, you know some of it. I'm curious. Anyone else? No one knows? We're just intrigued?
Just a wee bit.
A wee bit. We know a wee bit. You know a wee bit as well. Great. So we're just intrigued about this topic, or are you working with the oceans, or? Yeah? Who works with the ocean? Oh, okay, we're a bit shy, but actually we have quite a lot of ocean people in the space. So happy that you joined us. So I would love to kick off this evening with Dan Marsalis. Give him a warm hand. Thank you. Dan is a journalist at Trouw, covering the energy transition. And Dan, you've been writing about the deep sea in a series of 4 articles this year, and deep sea mining specifically. Why did you choose to start this series? Why did you choose this topic?
Well, thanks for having me.
Of course, thank you for being here.
By now, it's actually 5 articles.
Okay.
Meaning long-form articles, so slightly over 1,500 words. I started covering this topic because to me it was new, basically. So for Trouw, we think that the environmental issues are very important, even so important that we made it an important topic inside our economics desk. The energy transition, of course, is one of the big challenges that we have to face as humanity. And I was thinking, if we now have to realize this energy transition, we are facing away from fossil fuels into some other elements, apparently metals. But how are we going to get these metals? And if we are going to mine the deep sea, are we not making the problem actually worse?
Yeah.
So this is how it started. I sort of shied away from the big question, like, are we making it worse or is it actually better? Because I find it quite hard to answer. So I I stick to the basics actually.
Yeah.
So my first article was on the deep sea life. Then I covered the mining companies themselves and how the technologies are trying to engineers are trying to make the technology less harmful for the environment. Then I looked to the International Seabed Authority, which is a UN body, trying to regulate this new industry because it is a new industry; it's not active yet. Of course, I looked into the money. I mean, who will benefit most? That is a kind of interesting question, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's where I am now.
And out of all these angles that you took, what really surprised you? Or like, whoa, I did not expect that. Or
Well, the fact that there is a lot of life I guess this is what surprised most people, because when this technology, when the development started, it was thought that there was no life in the deep sea. But it turned out that there is an amazing abundance, actually, of life forms. Some very ugly. And some very scareful, from my perspective, it's just. And I mean, it's a very harsh environment. It's very cold. The pressure is immense. There's not a lot of food. There's no light. Who would want to live there? I wonder.
A lot of creatures.
Yes, apparently. Yes, yes. And then there was the detail that really hooked me, and that is that. So they live off, I don't know the term in English, actually, zeesneeuw, marine snow or something.
Marine snow, is that how we say it?
Yes, so little bits of dead animals and plants that live on the surface that, it's dead, so it doesn't really swim anymore, so it sinks to the bottom. And while sinking to the bottom, it gets eaten, and like 1% of it reaches the sea floor. And that is what these creatures live on.
That's how they survive. Yeah.
Yes, I was hooked.
Yeah, the snow part. Yeah, indeed. And just about deep sea mining itself, because I don't think we just saw none of us are experts on it, and maybe some of us don't know anything at all about it. So could you just shortly explain what this new industry is trying to do? What is deep sea mining, really? Yeah,
so I guess it depends on definitions then. So deep sea, let's start there. That is considered to be the piece, not the piece, but the part of the sea that is below 200 meters of water.
200 meters already?
Yeah,
okay.
Because that is where apparently the light is no longer penetrating.
Okay.
So it's starting to get very dark, and I guess it goes in zones. But then we're now talking about deep sea mining, so then mining also gets involved. And currently, the most interesting part that people are looking at, the mining part, of course, is getting metals from the ocean floor. You can do this in three ways. The most popular way of mining in the deep sea currently is looking at nodules, like small pieces of rocks that are sort of loosely laying on the ocean floor. They have formed over millions of years. They contain several metals that I think René will tell about. And you can basically suck them up. So what these mining companies are doing...
Giant vacuum cleaner.
Yeah, they are building giant vacuum cleaners the size of trucks, actually. And they will drive on rupsbanden. Caterpillars, yeah?
That's how you call it? Yeah, okay.
Threads, caterpillars, like these chains. They will drive over the seafloor and suck up the nodules and send them up to the mothership. Then you could also mine, in theory, manganese crusts and black smokers. These are like sort of rocky bottoms and chimney from the ocean floor where hot water is flowing into the ocean.
Right.
I guess many of us have seen those images. But I believe that the technology to mine those two kinds of resources is actually less far developed.
Okay.
So what we're
mainly
talking
the
tonight
nodules.
is the nodules and the collecting of the nodules.
Right, with the vacuum cleaners. Right.
Yes, it's vacuum the seafloor.
Okay. Thank you for this quick intro. Is it getting clearer what we're talking about? Yeah? Okay. Yeah. For me it is, actually. So I would love for us to get a little bit of a feel, like a visual feel of what we're talking about. You just described it already. But a beautiful film was made In Too Deep by one of our speakers here tonight. I'll introduce her in a bit, Farah Obaidullah. And we're just going to have a little look.
The deep sea is the largest ecosystem on the planet. It's everything from 200 meters depth all the way to the deepest point on the planet at just under 11,000 meters. And it provides the majority of habitable space on Earth, space in which life can live on this planet. The deep sea is a really extreme environment. It's dark, there's no sunlight, and the temperatures are near freezing. And then there are crushing pressures because of those thousands of meters of water above. But the life in the deep ocean is perfectly evolved and adapted to live in this wonderful part of our planet. And because of the range of habitats, there are thought to be 1 million species, and it is this vast repository of biodiversity.
Yeah, impressive. Yeah. I would love to invite our other speakers to be here. Can we give him a warm hand again? Yes? Okay, let's just start with clapping. Go up and I'll introduce you. Wonderful. And in this little clip, as I said, it was produced by Farah Obaidullah with a whole coalition, right, of organizations.
On behalf of the
Deep Sea Conservation Coalition. We'll get to you in a moment. I'll introduce you and ask you just a few questions to see, like, who are we working with here tonight? So, Farah, you have been an advocate for the ocean for 20 years now. You've been fighting for healthy oceans and bringing to light some of the issues that are ongoing. You co-founded the foundation The Ocean and Us, which was formerly known as Women for Oceans. And you are the editor of a book as well that was published, The Ocean and Us, under the same title. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Yes.
Yeah. And just to ask you first question, like, what do we know about life in the deep sea, and what do we actually not know at all?
Well, what do we not know? That's always a
good question, right?
If we don't know, we don't know. But just taking a step back, I mean, we live on this beautiful planet, and actually most of it is the ocean, right? So we look at the world through our terrestrial lens, and we often forget that actually 70% of this planet is blue, is ocean. We simply don't know yet everything there is to know about the ocean. We know that it is about 90 or 95% of habitable space on Earth. It's not just this horizon that covers 70% of the planet, but it's everything that lives beneath the waves. And that's something that only a few of us have the privilege to explore, to whether it's through beach holidays or living by the sea, or if you're lucky enough to have money and go down in submarines these days. But we simply
people don't survive.
Yes, we're coming up to that anniversary, I think, this week from the implosion of the Titan, that deep sea submersible. But seriously, I mean, we don't. There's a lot we don't know. We know that we don't know an awful lot. I think there's this saying, we know more about Mars than we know about the deep sea. We haven't mapped the deep sea yet. I mean, we're only just advancing our technology to allow us to go into the deep ocean, to start exploring what's down there. And every time we go down there, we discover new species. But there's a race. There's a race between the people that want to explore, do science, and develop our understanding about the deep ocean, and those that see this as an opportunity to exploit what's down there and make money off of what's down there. And as long as none of us know what's down there, we are kept, in the dark, pardon the pun, but we really are. And we have to rely currently on the information that these prospective mining companies come up with, because at the moment they're the ones putting in the money to actually do deep sea diving expeditions, and a few, of course, philanthropic billionaires that are. But it's a very difficult thing for governments to keep up with in terms of exploring the deep sea.
So the exploration and exploitation are kind of close together at this point.
Well, yes, but if we're not careful, exploitation will, is on the cusp of beating us to it, before we've even understood what is down there and what it means for our own existence. Yeah. And I also just want to emphasize, I mean, you heard it in the video, but we're not talking about life forms that will regenerate on our, in our lifetimes. We're talking about animals that can reach, fish that can reach several hundred years old, corals that can reach several thousand years old, and sponges several, 10,000 years old. And maybe you've heard of the Greenland shark. That's a shark that reaches 400 years old. So this is not something that we can really afford to experiment with, in my opinion.
Or lose, Thank you so much. René Klein, next to you. René, you're a professor of industrial ecology at the University of Leiden. Thanks so much for joining us as well.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Glad
happy.
to be here.
Yeah,
Important topic.
Important topic, exactly. So maybe you can tell us a bit, because industrial ecology is your angle. Why are the miners so interested in the deep sea?
Yes, as an industrial ecologist, we study basically the metabolism of society, and one of the things that we're looking at is the materials that we need, the metals that we need for the energy transition. And of course, we all know that the energy transition is really something that we have to complete as quickly as possible in order to avoid catastrophic climate change. So we need all those wind turbines, solar cells, electric vehicles, etc., in order to make this happen. And all of these technologies are basically based on different materials in our current energy system. Our current energy system is carbon-based, fossil carbon-based, and we're moving away from that, and that's great. But we are shifting into the direction of an energy system that is based on metals. Now, the great thing about metals is that you can also recycle metals to a large extent. So you could also argue it's a one-off thing. Once you have all these metals out there in your wind turbine, solar cells, and electric vehicles, if you take care of the stocks in society and design products in a circular way, you can actually recycle these metals to a large extent. So that's important. But of course, before we actually can start using recycling as a major source, we have to put in a lot of primary mined materials, primary mined metals. Some might argue there's not enough metals in the world to actually make this happen. That is certainly not true. It truly depends on the rate in which you want to have this transition. It depends on the type of technologies that you want to use, etc. So, and that is why a lot of these companies are interested in metals that are out there on the seabed in these nodules, because basically what they argue is that all the metals that you need in an EV battery, cobalt, manganese, nickel, copper, they're all in these nodules. So basically what they say, well, they have all the metals here for these electric vehicles. So there's a lot of money to be made. And I think that is the main reason why companies are interested in it. And there's one other additional reason, and that has to do with strategic autonomy. There's a lot of discussion now about protecting the resource supply of local industries. So in the US, you have the Inflation Reduction Act. In China, you have Made in China 2025. In Europe, we now have a Critical Raw Material Act. That all are focused on how do we secure the continuous inflow of metals into our societies for our industries to flourish, basically.
Yeah.
And that could be another argument if you want to get rid of, let's say, a lot of these metals we're dependent on China. So you could argue that, well, if you go to the deep seas, then you get rid of that kind of dependency. So those are the two main arguments I see that are used at the moment. Yeah,
the profits and the strategic independence,
yeah,
from a geopolitical point of view.
Yes.
But we will be arguing that, or at least for presenting why those arguments are flawed.
Yeah, well, Farah, what do you want to say about that?
Oh, I thought we were going to finish the round, but with Matt, or shall I jump right in?
Well, no, okay, let's park it for one moment, but let's definitely not forget it. But I do already want to ask you, René, before going to Matthew. This is the story. You go energy transition, great. There is these metals up for grabs, literally. But do we actually need it for the energy transition?
No.
No, is the short answer.
Yeah, short answer is no. I can delve into that a bit deeper. It has to do with the amount of materials that we still have on land, the type of technologies that we use, and also, last but not least, the speed in which we can actually extract these raw materials from the ocean floor.
Yeah.
And all three basically say, well, this is not a solution to that problem of that we might have a lack of materials.
Okay. So let's dive a little bit deeper into that in a second, but that's already good to just clarify. Well, Matthew, Gianni, we're so honored that you could be here tonight. Actually, because you were going to be on Zoom online, or because you're traveling all over the place, really advocating for this theme. You just got back from New York for that reason. You are the co-founder of the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition. We just saw the beautiful video that was made, but that's just like the tip of the iceberg of what you've been doing over the past 30 years. You've gained insights on the ocean and activities, harmful activities that are happening, done several EU deep sea research projects that you were involved in. That kind of summarizes it well?
Yeah, no, very well. I might add that I was a commercial fisherman for 10 years prior to the activism, or I became an activist as a commercial fisherman, and then transitioned into working with non-governmental organizations and other entities to promote international conservation for the oceans.
Yeah, really interesting transition, actually. What happened?
Well, it was one late night. I was the only one up on the vessel on the back deck, and a bolt of lightning hit me, and I fell off the vessel. And this guy came walking across the water and said, "You're chosen. You know, go." No. Well, for a number of reasons, but partly it was a love of the oceans. Partly I worked in a variety of different fisheries. Some I liked, some I didn't, and I saw lots of problems with fisheries, bycatch. Habitat destruction, depending on the types of gears that were used. Saw a lot of social changes in the fisheries, fishing communities kind of getting forced out of fishing because of big industrial trawlers moving into the areas and fishing the same species. And this was off the Northern California, Oregon coast. And plus, the last boat I was working on, I worked for 5 years. The first 5 years I fished in a variety of different fisheries in the United States, which is where I'm from originally, up the East Coast and down the West Coast and so forth. But I saw there was no future in that fishery, that it was that our vessel, and we were trawling a deep area along the Central California coast, was almost single-handedly taking down the fish stocks, and literally dozens of different populations of fish. And the authorities, the fisheries biologists and managers and so forth, weren't aware of how bad it was. And I thought, this fishery is going to close at some point. You know, we can't keep fishing like this. We were fishing a 100-mile section of the coast. And sure enough, after I got off, the fishery closed about 2 or 3 years later. It eventually came back, some of it, 20 years later, because of a shutdown. But it didn't look like it was going to be much of a future there. So I decided to get into fishing conservation, and the folks I was working with the last year fished. We decided to fight a big dredge disposal project in the area where we were fishing along the coast. We felt we had no chance of winning, and we beat them. We did an at-sea blockade. One of our members, one of the guys fishing there, got some dead fish carcasses and drove them over to the head offices of the Port of Oakland, California, and dumped them on the front steps in protest and so forth. And we actually beat it, and it was very empowering.
Yeah.
And I decided to work more. Work for conservation. So
beautiful. What a story. Yeah. And one of the reasons, or actually a big reason why we're gathered here today, is because this year is a very crucial year, right? When it comes to deep sea mining. Can you say a little bit about that? Like just get the context. Like, where are we at?
Yeah, well, I think both Dan and Farah mentioned the International Seabed Authority. Most of the deep sea is found in areas beyond individual countries' maritime jurisdiction. And so any mining in most of the deep sea in these areas, most of the mineral deposits are likely to be in these, or that have been found to date, are out beyond national jurisdiction. And so the International Seabed Authority was established under the Law of the Sea Convention, which was negotiated in the 1970s. It entered into force in 1994. Set up a body called the International Seabed Authority, which is an autonomous international regulatory body. Technically, it's affiliated with the UN, but the United Nations has no control over it. It's the member countries the countries that are members of the International Seabed Authority are ultimately responsible for the decisions that it makes. There's no authority above it in terms of decision making. And it was founded on some really quite extraordinarily progressive ideas and principles at the time in the 1970s when this international regime was negotiated. All countries should be able to mine, not just the rich countries that had the money and the technological capacity to do so. The benefits financial benefits and other benefits from mining would be shared, would be shared equally with all countries in the world. That the International Seabed Authority would be mandated to act on behalf of humankind as a whole and for the benefit of humankind as a whole, and not just individual companies and countries. And a number of other, and that it was possible to mine, and I think, Dan, you raised this, to mine without doing damage to the marine environment, because at the time, in the 1970s, they believed there's not that much living down there, and so therefore we can mine, and there are provisions in the Law of the Sea Convention that says that the ISA shall ensure the effective protection of the marine environment and prevention of damage to the flora and fauna of the marine environment. Fast forward to 2024, and a lot of this is no longer true. We realize it's highly biologically diverse in the deep ocean, particularly in the nodule provinces, but also in other areas. There is a sort of a monopoly on the exploration licenses that have been granted to date. 7 countries and 3 to 4 companies hold 25 of the 30 exploration licenses that the.
So it's not benefiting all of humankind.
Not everybody is sharing in the opportunity there, and most of these are either big power developing countries or developed countries that hold these licenses, and companies from the north that are using developing countries to gain access to these resources.
Right.
And so, but at the same time, one company in particular, the metals company, which I think maybe some of you are aware of, is partnered with the Allseas here in the Netherlands and in Switzerland, and is really pushing and making use of various provisions of the Law of the Sea Convention, which negotiators in the 1970s did not foresee would prove problematic. But today they are using those to open the door to deep seabed mining, to force that open, to say countries are legally required to give them a license to go mining. And of course, their motivation is profit. You know, they talk up about how, these metals are needed for the green transition, billions of tons of metals there on the deep sea just waiting to be plucked like golf balls off a golf course. When in fact, the impact will be quite severe in terms of the scale and the longevity of these impacts, according to scientists.
Yeah.
And the International Seabed Authority now has the next 1 to 2 years to make some hard decisions, the countries that are members, as to which direction this organization will go. Will it open up the deep ocean to mining? And if it does, and in our view, and we've been participating in negotiations at the Seabed Authority since 2014, when the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition gained observer status there, our assessment is, if the first countries or companies that get the mining licenses prove profitable, there's going to be a lot more money interested in investing in the industry. And we get calls from time to time from big companies like Glencore, like Anglo American, saying, gee, we're hearing the next real big thing is deep seabed mining. What do you guys have to say about it? Can we do it sustainably, et cetera, and so forth? So there's interest out there.
Yeah.
And if those first goers prove profitable, in our view, given the politics of decision-making at the International Seabed Authority and the bylaws that have been established, which are the result of bizarre sorts of compromises in terms of who gets to decide what, could mean that there could be a gold rush to open up to pile into deep seabed mining, and the ISA, as a regulatory body, would not be able to exercise a lot of control over the development of the industry.
Yeah.
All right.
I guess it's good to add like a timeline, because I think that's what you were asking. And as of yet, deep seabed mining is not allowed. So everybody's waiting for this mining code that will set regulation as to environmental standards, the divide of the profits. But as of yet, an agreement has not been reached. I believe a lot of work is actually to be done. But the sort of deadline, I don't know if it's an official deadline now, is set for 2025, if I'm correct?
It's not an official deadline, it's an aspirational target.
It's an ambition.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's not binding on the member countries.
Before we go deeper and deeper and deeper into this, because we will, I just want to check here for just the basics of the deep sea and deep sea mining. Is there anything we still need to understand? Yeah, there's one question. I can repeat the question. So how exactly does deep sea mining harm life down there?
Actually, I think there's 3 effects.
The extent of the harm and the duration of the harm.
Yeah. So how does it? Yeah.
And how long does it take for the plume to settle again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, so let me repeat that for also people listening from home. So how does it exactly harm the ocean? How long does that harm last? What's the extent of it?
Yeah.
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 And
Oh,
just on
let's
the,
add more questions. Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
After answering these ones, maybe the authority that we're talking about that governs the international waters, is it like a democratic authority? So it's a number of nation states, but are they prone to lobbying? Are there smart people there? That's maybe also.
Okay, and maybe let's ask questions with the mic because then it's nice to hear your voices as well. So is it democratic? Are these smart people? Can we trust them? And one last, do we want to get the mic to you then, just for diversity of voices?
Yeah, and I also wanted to ask about one argument. It wasn't, you mentioned like two arguments, the geopolitical one and a different one. I forgot which one it was. Which the
Energy transition, I think.
Oh yeah, that we need them. But also they say that one, I think their most valid point is that land mining is also very destructive. And also there's a lot of human rights violations. Congo, Indonesia, China, Bolivia, Serbia is now being talked about. I've been there, I've seen what it does to the local populations. So maybe we can like add this to the other question, how destructive it is, also compared to land mining. And does this also mean that we're not going to be mining on land anymore if we try to do this? Because I'm not sure about that. But
Yeah.
Good question.
Great questions. Yeah, everyone wants to answer.
Yeah, I think we're all jumping at the bit.
Everyone's
Answer,
jumping.
but,
It's okay if I start with the
sure.
with the first three results. The impacts, I mean,
Well, I
not
think
the
we'll
results.
just add to that. if there's
Yeah,
something
I think
missing
that's a
otherwise.
wise idea. So you will have three types of impact, I guess. So first of all, the nodules. They are on the floor, and they will be removed. You could think these are stupid rocks, so who cares? But apparently they are very porous. So there are a lot of small creatures are actually living in the nodules. Then, you can see them on the screen. It's I describe them as potato-like. I don't know if that's accurate. I never
Like a
peel
lump
my
of coal,
potatoes.
perhaps.
So if you remove the nodules, you will also remove the habitat for the animals that actually live on the nodules. So that will be result one. The mining companies do not dispute this. They say, if the nodules are removed there, I mean, we will have removed the animals that are living on it as well. Then you have the plumes that we mentioned. So you will have a benthic plume that is a plume of sediment, very fine sand-like substance that is sort of not flowing, but like an avalanche moving over the seabed, over the sea floor. So that will cover a larger area, probably
Caused by the mining.
caused by the mining machine. It is caused because the mining machine will drive over the seabed while sucking up the nodules. But it cannot only suck up the nodules; it will necessarily also suck up some of the sediment. They are trying to limit it, but some sediment will of course be sucked up, and then the sediment is worthless. So you will not want to move it all the way to the ship. You will want to leave it on the seabed. So they are making technology to disperse most of the sediment on the seafloor. A small fraction of the sediment will then also be removed to the ships with the nodules, and that will have to be returned into the sea because you do not want to transport unnecessary stuff. So they are trying to pump it back into the sea to a level of at least 1,200 meters depth.
You can see
So there it will
Yeah,
have
you
a
can see
second.
behind you. Yeah.
Ah, yeah, cool. Yeah, actually, these images, they are quite accurate, I guess.
Yeah, this is from the film In Too Deep.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So here you see the sediment plume in the animation
And that is
behind the vehicle,
why is that harmful?
because it will cover all the animals that are living there.
it's basically
And
gonna
the
suffocate,
animals, like I
Yeah.
said, so you have the marine snow, so they sort of filter feed that
Yeah.
from the water. But now they get this massive amount of.
Right.
Yeah,
I would love to
stuff
have
over.
Farah add her perspective, but you wanted to add a third point, Dan?
No, the third sediment plume is like the third effect, negative effect possibly, is the sediment plume that is caused by the pumping back of the
Right. Okay,
sediment
that's
from
what
the
you said.
ship.
It's gonna
I
Okay,
guess
so
that's what we're going to see now, I guess. I suppose. I'm not sure.
Yes, we'll
Yeah.
see that now. So it'll be a secondary plume that's going to
Yeah.
come into
Yeah.
the water, and you have to also remember that this sediment is likely going to be highly toxic because it's the processing of metals, of these nodules, and that residue is going to be in the sediment. Like heavy metal residue will come back into the water column, as you can see. And we also shouldn't forget that the ocean is the world's largest carbon sink. And that carbon, a lot of that, is stored, of course, in life forms, swimming in the ocean, in fish, in whales, and whatever. But most of it is stored in our seabed. So if we start disturbing the seabed, which we will inevitably do, because we're as Dan says, we're not sucking up just nodules, we're sucking up between 10 and 30 centimeters of sediment, we're actually disturbing that locked away carbon and potentially re-releasing that back into the water column with all the chemistry potential consequences to the to ocean chemistry.
Is this plume correct actually? Because I think it might be a little bit smaller than this one. This is very impressive.
I can answer that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, there have been a number of studies on this discharge plume, and probably the most comprehensive have been done by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology using sediment from the area where the nodules are. And basically, they concluded, the paper published in 2021, I think. Henko, you might know, but that the sediment plume generated by the discharge of the wastewater and some mining fines into the water column could travel up to 1,000 to 1,400 kilometers in multiple directions before all of it finally settles onto the bottom.
Wow.
So the heavier stuff would probably go down first, relatively close to the discharge point or below the discharge point, but there would be some that would
Actually
kind of drift on the
gigantic,
currents. And there are currents in the ocean that, as you go down through the depths, you get different currents moving in different directions.
Yeah.
Not a kind of a static sort of stable ecosystem.
See it like
I would
a
love to go back to
sandstorm underwater.
Fada. I feel you were really. Do we see the full impact? Because indeed, you were also mentioning the carbon that might be re-released. Indeed, the toxicity.
Just one question about this plume. I think it would be rather simple to offload that on board of a bulk carrier and more to the drilling ship.
An additional solution could be to pump it all the way back to the sea floor. A Belgian company is looking into that solution, but then it will still be covering like.
You'll create a plume, a second plume on the seafloor.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I mean, do you need that material in the environment where you've extracted it, or could you just say, I'll pump it into a bulk carrier and dump it somewhere on land?
I guess we have an engineer talking.
Maybe make a nice beach out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I would love to go back to my question to Farah, because I feel you were painting for us a full extent of the impact.
Well, I'm just trying to visualize it, right? Because none of us can go 4 kilometers into the ocean floor. So none of us can go with a checklist and a camera and see and audit these areas. Just by the way, I used to be a certified auditor, and I've also audited mines on land. But I just want to say that, this... Just coming back to also what Dan says, it's not just about the plumes or the light pollution, which we haven't even got to, or the sound pollution, which again, sound travels much faster as well in the ocean. But it's also about the habitat, the essential habitat that these nodules provide to slow-growing organisms, right? And so it's by removing that, we're basically saying, you know what, we're not going to see that return. It's not going to come back on human timescales. A mine on land, and also coming to your point at the back, a mine on land, we can improve the way we mine on land. We can contain it. We can regenerate areas. We can attach strict criteria in terms of certifying mines. The human rights abuse that you mentioned, we can ensure that we're not importing minerals from areas where child labor is used. We try and do that with fisheries, with timber, with other resources. So we should be able to do that with minerals. There are certification bodies for minerals, so we could apply that in a more stricter sense. But more fundamentally, I can't imagine a single company out there saying, "Oh, you know what? There's a country from the global north that's going to trash our ocean. For minerals, they're going to start mining the deep sea. We don't need to mine the Congo or Indonesia." They're not going to stop because someone else starts. We're just going to flood the market with more mines. And I just have to say, before we move on, I've been working in ocean conservation for 20 years, on all kinds of issues. And this is honestly the most terrifying prospect I see for the ocean, because it's going to happen in an area that none of us can regulate or control. I mean, Matt said it's the areas, beyond national jurisdiction, but this basically means the high seas. It's a wild west. It's not the same as mining in your own sovereign waters, where if things go wrong, you could take a company to court, or sue someone, or it's easier to regulate. On the high seas, any activity will require the political will of another state to hold a country or company to account that does something wrong in the high seas. And I've seen that with personally firsthand with fishing, illegal fishing on the high seas. Even though you have documented everything from the crimes committed, change of IMO number, catch of collection of tuna transshipped from catcher vessels, all kinds of blatant violations of the rules that are in place. This was an example in the Central Western Pacific Ocean. Even though we had documented that, all of that, had enforcement officers with us on board, bearing witness to all of this, there was no single country that wanted to hold that flag state to account over a violation happening in an area that doesn't belong to anyone, because that requires a lot of political will. There's nobody that is, you're not appeasing your constituency at home. It's not a political issue. So it doesn't matter how well things are regulated in your mining code. If we start mining on the high seas, it will become a gold rush, a race to the bottom, and it will be effectively impossible to control or regulate. And that's just why it's terrifying to me. It's going to trigger a new era of colonialism, because the high seas make up half our planet. This isn't one small mine. This is opening the floodgates to, 31 exploration licenses currently that could be translated or transferred, transitioned into exploitation licenses. That's 1.3 million square kilometers. And that's just an area of those, that's just the area of licenses currently, exploration licenses that are currently, that currently exist. But that could expand to half our planet. That's the thing that terrifies me most. And I just don't think we're ready.
Yeah.
I'm getting a bit confused.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about...
Yeah, please wait for the microphone. Yeah, thank you.
We're talking about seabed at 200 meter depths, at 4 kilometers, at 12 kilometers. I suppose also life is different at different depths.
Well, no, but I think...
Yeah, but that's one question. Mm-hmm. And how much of the seabed area is covered with these nodules we're talking about? That's the question. I don't know the answer.
Sure.
If we're talking about only a couple of square kilometers, but I haven't a clue, it's probably not a big problem. But if it's your whole ocean floor, okay, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, no, so just I'll answer the first part, because Dan was just defining the deep sea. The deep sea is defined as the ocean below 200 meters. The area of interest where they want to start mining, right now the Clarion-Clipperton zone is kind of the most imminent sort of area in the Pacific Ocean, that's at a depth of around 3 to 4 kilometers. So that's the area of interest. So we are talking very deep ocean.
And this nice movie we just saw, what depth was that taken?
Well, that was an animation that we just saw.
Before that, I think the first...
That would have been deep sea, so the different depths. Also 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers, yeah.
Regarding the size of the area, it's roughly the size of Europe.
The total area?
The Clarion-Clipperton zone,
that they want to start mining. Yeah. I mean, you also have to imagine the deep sea. I mean, the topography of the deep sea varies a lot, right? I mean, just like the topography on land varies a lot. I mean, Holland is flat and Italy isn't. I mean, so I can't answer your question precisely of every location in the deep sea, because it is such a huge area, the size of Europe. The depths are going to vary, but it's all deep sea.
Thank you, Farah. I would love indeed to give René and Matt the chance to also add their perspectives. René.
Yeah, and also I think it's good to mention that the Clarion-Clipperton zone is the one that is now, let's say, prominently, because it's a nice area to start. But there are other areas as well, right, where you have these. So there's a lot of areas where you have these manganese nodules out there. And also to just sketch kind of the size that you would need. If you would want to build a battery for an average electric car, you would need an area of about 20 by 25 meters to get the nickel out of the manganese nodules that you would need for one car. So imagine billion. We have in 2050 we have about 2 billion cars in the world. So 2 billion times this square of 20 by 25 meters. That's a lot. And I think, I think it's a fair point that was raised. Okay, so of course there are impacts in the deep sea, but there are also impacts on land. And I think that's indeed a third argument that people use to move to deep sea mining. I'm fully aware of all the impacts of let's say, land-based mining and all the social issues, environmental issues that are related to that. But I agree also that, it's not like that if we start deep sea mining that we will stop mining on land. First of all, because the scale in which you can do the mining is way smaller than what is now being done on land. Even if you look at the whole Clarion-Clipperton zone, so this whole area that is basically the size of Europe, the amount of copper that is in that area is way less than the amount that we have in mines on land.
Can you wait for the microphone? No worries.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but I just wanted, because I was kind of confused because I read that there's more cobalt, more nickel, more manganese in only the Clarion-Clipperton zone than all landmine combined.
That's true.
That's what they say. So that's why I'm.
Yeah. Now, the International Seabed Authority, they created a report on this, and for manganese and nickel, that's indeed true. Well, if it comes to the reserves, and I mean, if you look at mining and the amount that is available on land, we only know the reserves that are economically mineable. So that's a subset of all the mines that you could have on land, let's say. But if you look at the reserves, then the reserves in the Clarion-Clipperton zone for nickel and manganese are much larger than what we have on land. But if you look at copper and cobalt, for example, it's much smaller than what we have on land. So that's also something to keep in mind. But if it comes to the impacts, I would argue that, you would need to mine a lot, let's say, in order to come to the scale of land-based mining. So we're not there yet at all. And like was also argued, we won't stop land-based mining. This is an economic system, right? So you just mine the cheapest stuff that you can mine in the cheapest way. So this will just basically flood the market. Indeed, prices will be lower, less incentives for circular economy, less incentives for designing products without these critical raw materials, but because you could also design batteries without cobalt and without nickel and without manganese. They are already 40% of the market in the form of lithium iron phosphate batteries. If you buy a Tesla nowadays you can choose for the long range one that has a nickel manganese cobalt battery, or you can choose a standard range one and that has a lithium iron phosphate battery in it. No nickel, no manganese, no cobalt.
Or the sodium ion batteries.
Recycle then, because it's also cheaper to just mine than recycle right now. So it's all about regulations, right?
That's a big problem. I mean, I teach circular economy as well, and one of the main issues of circular economy is that raw materials are way too cheap.
Yeah.
So there's little incentive for recycling.
Yeah. Interesting. Matt, what did you want to add?
Well, just a couple things based on the questions that were asked. So
can we trust these ISA people? Are they democratic? Are they capable?
Are they smart?
I've got a
Are they
strong
smart?
answer there.
Yeah.
They're smart and diabolical. There's a lot of smart people there. But let me first start with the longevity and the scope. So a typical mining claim area issued by the ISA for nodules in the Clarion-Clipperton zone is 75,000 square kilometers. So a company or country that has that claim area has that area all to itself. Nobody else can mine there. It's basically the size of the Benelux countries. A typical mining operation at the production targets that are discussed at the International Seabed Authority, which is approximately 3 million tons dry weight per year, would involve mining anywhere from 200 to 400 square kilometers per year, and you're strip mining the nodules and the sediment around it and so forth. So you may have over the course of a 30-year contract, which is the time frame in which these initial contracts would be issued with renewal clauses, you could basically mine something like between 8,000 to 12,000 square kilometers over a 30-year period. And it's not going to be all square kilometers, and it's not going to be all in one place. It will be in patches. So these nodules in many cases are concentrated in some areas and less concentrated in other areas, maybe areas of several tens to several hundreds of square kilometers of nodules concentrated. So you can picture, say, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and you would say mine out an area the size of Amsterdam, and then you would move to mine out an area the size of Rotterdam, and then you would mine an area the size of Brussels or half of Wallonia and so forth over the course of a 30-year period. Some scientists, people debate the extent to which the plumes generated on the bottom would flow beyond the mining sites, but there is a paper came out and published by quite a number of scientists that have been studying the nodule mining, and they said they could easily cover the plume flows on the seabed itself could easily cover an area of 1 to 3 times the size of the actual mining. So you could potentially have a footprint of mining of 30 to 40,000 square kilometers. And in terms of longevity, I like to quote Stephanie Kaiser, Craig Smith, and Pedro Martinez, 3 deep-sea biologists, deep-sea scientists, who were the editors of a special issue on the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, published by Marine Biology in 2017. And basically they said that up to half of the species that they find in the deep sea may be rare, in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, in these nodule areas, may be rare, although it may be a factor of lack of sampling, extensive sampling, but they've, rare and potentially endemic to the areas where they were found. About half the species that have been discovered to date are so-called nodule obligate species, meaning at some portion of their life history, they actually need the nodules to live. So you have sponges,
half
corals,
the species.
Half of and you take away the nodules, and they basically say, and so as a result, they estimate, they said basically that because the nodules take millions of years to grow back, that it would take millions of years for these populations of animals
It really
to recover.
feels like we have no idea what we're doing.
And even the motile sediment infauna, the things that crawling around in the sediment, such as nematode worms, could take hundreds to thousands of years to recover from the impact of mining operations.
Right.
So it's that longevity as
Yeah.
well as the sheer scale of these. And coming back to something that Renee said, I've done the calculations on what do you get when you mine 3 million tons of nodules. Just using today, or last year, as a baseline for how much terrestrial, how much of these metals were produced by terrestrial mining in 2023. A single nodule mining operation would put approximately 0.16% additional copper into the marketplace, maybe 1 to 1.2% more nickel that's mined terrestrially, and possibly around 3.2% more cobalt. But that's taking in consideration primary production. You also have quite a bit of recycling already in place for scrap or reused copper in particular, but also nickel and cobalt. And so the actual amounts would be less in terms of what's available. So in other words, the scale of the potential damage of this industry is far out of proportion, in my view, to any sort of benefit that could be derived for adding additional amounts of metal into the economy. And I think you were saying this, Renee, by the time the ISA could get to the point where it could produce large quantities of metals, we're either going to have a circular economy and renewable technologies without those metals, the deep sea metals, or our society.
Yeah, Renee, maybe
serious
you can,
problem,
just to really understand that aspect of it, indeed, because the destruction is gigantic, the output is not that much, and it's very slow. And by the time, in 30 years' time, when we would have this industry up and running, actually we don't really need it anymore because we will have our energy transition hopefully completed.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key messages when people ask, do we have enough metals for the energy transition? My answer is always yes. But that's not the scarce. So the metals are not the scarce resource here. The scarce resource is time. Can we actually extract those metals in the next 30 years or 40 years, if you want to go to 2 degrees, in order to make this transition happen? I think that is a very crucial question. And if you look at land-based mining, that's a struggle. Does seabed mining help? tiny little bit. So why would you destroy an whole ecosystem if you're not really going to help solve this issue? I think that is a very good point that you.
And it's very difficult to understand at this point in the conversation. I found. I also know that, we try to get representatives of the mining companies or the companies that are thinking about this to join this conversation. They were not interested, but I really wonder, what are then the arguments to do this?
I mean, the short term.
Slightly puzzled because
There's a microphone coming here. If you could keep it brief, because I would.
Yeah, let's go back to democratic or not. But
Yeah, that we didn't answer that
If we
point yet.
argue that there's only a few percentage of the total use of metals which will be provided by deep sea mining,
Yeah.
and you just mentioned the fact that the raw materials at this moment are so cheap that recycling is not an issue yet. Now, where is the economic driver for deep sea mining?
Well, that's exactly what I was also asking.
Well, even if you just produce 1% of world production, you can still make a lot of money.
but you have to do it at rock bottom prices.
Yeah, but probably you can do it. I mean, I don't know exactly the economics. I think you know more about that than I do. But I could imagine. I mean, that could be one reason, is that these companies think they can do it cheaper than land-based mining, and there are some clear advantages. If you look, for example, so you don't have to build any infrastructure. Of course, you need a ship and you need the machines, etc. But for example, in some cases in land-based mines, you just have to build railways, mines. You have to bring a lot of people there, and this is an operation that you can do with very little manpower, with a lot of automated machines down on the ocean floor, directly into a ship. You can sail the ship directly to a place where you can refine the metals. So in that respect, I think it could well be that it could be an economic operation, and therefore you could make money. But I mean, you have a different.
No,
Can I?
Yeah, maybe that's a good point. Ecologically, you say, and that is. So I have a long history in doing life cycle assessments of all kinds of products, and okay, and there's there are a lot of life cycle assessments of these types of operations, and what you often see is that indeed deep sea mining comes out favorably. And why is that? Well, if you just look at the impact that can be quantified in an LCA, which is not the impacts in the deep seas, that's not included in those analyses. Then you would just look at energy use, the transport emissions, etc., etc. Then it could well be that from an LCA perspective, it's actually better.
But not from the perspective of millions millions of years.
And that's why I say a life cycle assessment will not answer your question, is this better from an environmental perspective? Because the most important impact is not included.
Clear. I would love to just answer our last question, and because I want to get into the opportunity here to do something about this. So if you could briefly answer, are they smart people or not?
There are a lot of very smart people, some very smart lawyers. But is it a democratic process? No, it's not. And it's extraordinary what negotiators in the 1970s created in terms of a decision-making process, and how that was further complicated by some amendments to the seabed mining provisions of the Law of the Sea that the United States, West Germany, and other countries, developed countries, insisted on in 1994. And so you have, for example, the main decision-making body is the Council of the ISA, 36 countries, all right, that are elected by the Assembly of the ISA, which is made up of 168 countries plus the European Union. If a company applies for a mining license, and this body of technocrats, for lack of a better word to describe it, that serve in their individual capacity and meet behind closed doors, and whose meetings are off limits to everybody else except for the Secretariat of the ISA, recommends that the company get a license after reviewing their application, then as few as 2 countries on the Council of the ISA, the 36 members of the ISA, member country, can guarantee that that company gets a license, even if the other 34 are opposed and the other 130 plus members of the Assembly are opposed. And it has to do with Cold War politics It has to do with big power politics in the 1970s, and it has to do with the actual remarkable influence that developing countries had over those negotiations in the 1970s. You know, the newly independent developing countries, in many respects, coming out of the decolonization era, more or less decolonialization era in the 1950s and the 1960s. So, one of the things that we argue for is that you need to take the countries that are members of this organization need to take a hard look at some of these bylaws and figure out a way to get around it. And one of these is to make it much more democratic.
Yeah.
So if, for example, the ISA said, okay, if somebody gets a license, because it has a legal obligation to act on behalf of humankind as a whole, at a minimum, you could argue you would need a 2/3 majority of the Legal and Technical Commission to agree that somebody should get a license, then 2/3 of the council, and then 2/3 of the assembly, which is the full body of the 168 members.
Yeah.
That would be a much more democratic process than the current voting structure.
Great, interesting.
Stands.
I want to get into the next part because I feel it's pretty clear that this is destructive business. Can you keep it for later? Can you keep? We're going to have another round of questions. So I'm going to remember both of you. But indeed, just for us, it's a very crucial year, as we said. Next month, there's going to be another big gathering by the International Seabed Authority in Jamaica. Not bad. That's where they are, right? Mm-hmm. And it feels like after years and years and years, now is the time that this international mining code that we started talking about is right around the corner. So first of all, just if someone could very clearly, briefly explain, like, what does it mean if this mining code, comes into being?
If it comes into being?
Yeah, what then?
From what I understand is that from that day on, companies that already have a license to explore a certain area of the seabed, and they have fulfilled all criteria like environmental research and whatnot, then they could apply for exploitation license, meaning they could ask for permission to start commercial mining.
Start the mining,
yeah.
Exactly. So once this code is there, it's...
Yes, the question is, will that code be there? Because it seems to me that a lot has to be negotiated.
Right. And if this code, if they can't get this code together, does that mean there will not be any mining? Or does anyone... Farah?
No, I mean, I'm sure Matt can answer this better, but I mean, sort of technically, legally, mining is already allowed to happen. It's just that we have a sort of agreement among these nations that represented the ISA that, well, we're not, let's at least get a mining code in place. Because there was something that it's boring thing, perhaps, but there was something that was triggered at the height of the pandemic called the 2-year rule under UNCLOS, under the UN Law of the Sea. And this essentially meant that once that rule was triggered, and that was the end of June 2021, after 2 years, the company or the country that issued that triggered that rule could start mining. And so that brought us to last year, July 2023, when technically, legally, mining was allowed to begin. But in the meantime, a lot of pressure has been brought to bear on the International Seabed Authority. We see a lot more attention to this issue, right? I mean, 4 years ago, I don't know, there was, maybe 1 or 2 countries, but now...
Might I add one thing to your story?
Can I finish my
sentence? Yeah, can we let Farah finish?
Yeah. So now we have 27 governments either calling for a pause or a moratorium and even a ban on deep sea mining. So we've come a long way, and there's hundreds of civil society groups and scientists and companies like BMW, Volvo, Volkswagen, Renault, all these electric vehicle companies that are saying they don't need these metals for their supply chains and they support a moratorium on deep sea mining. So in these years, we have come a long way, and particularly also since the 2 years was triggered. And so last year at the International Seabed Authority, I was there for the assembly meeting anyway. They had decided at the council meeting to basically kick the can down the road by another 2 years, just to say it, bluntly, but to say, okay, we'll develop a mining code, we'll aim for July 2025 to have that mining code ready, and then we will decide again whether to allow mining to happen. I mean, that's the sort of the short of it. Of course, there's a lot of legal nuance there, but that's the short of it. So
Right.
that's
So it's technically already possible to do mining, but we're kind of waiting for a mining code to say like how to mine in a way that's
and
not too
agree
harmful.
to it, right? As
agree, yeah.
civilization, agree to this massive assault to our oceans. Are we going to do this
Right.
or not? And nobody's that comfortable yet in an international setting to say, yeah, let's do it. So they
Right.
basically said, let's talk about this in 2025.
Right.
That's
Okay. Okay.
When I was so rude as to interrupt, apologies. I wanted to add that it's not just a fictional threat. I mean, there's a company, the metals company. It's partnering with Nauru,
The
small
metals
island
company
state.
it's called.
Yeah, the metals company. Yeah, it's a Canadian firm. It's partnering with Nauru, small island state, and Nauru was the island state that actually triggered this 2-year rule. It basically the company can now apply for a license under the regulations, if I understand correct. But they have repeatedly said that they keep this option open.
Okay.
So yeah, they could do it if the regulatory process, like the negotiations, take too much time.
So because they feel it's taking too long, we're just going to start now.
Yeah, and
with
I guess
or
they have
without a
to
mining code.
motivate their investors as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Matt. Yeah.
Well, for those of you who are kind of political kind of international negotiation wonks, I mean, I'm completely into this, but this 2-year rule. So on the regulations, the Law of the Sea Convention says that it takes the 36 members of the Council to unanimously agree to adopt regulations before they can be adopted. So even one country on the Council can say no, and there's no regulations, exploitation regulations. But even with the regulations in place, they still have to agree to a royalty regime, how much are the companies going to have to pay, how they're going to share the benefits from that royalty regime, how much they're going to compensate developing countries for adverse impacts to their mining economies from competition from deep sea bed metals. This is written into the Law of the Sea Convention. In addition to the regulations, which currently in draft form are over 200 pages, much of which is in bracketed text and redlined text and different proposals, and there's another 400-page supplementary set of proposals to the 200-page draft text. They're nowhere close to coming to adopt the regulations. But the sword of Damocles that's hanging over the head is this 2-year rule. What is this 2-year rule? What is the origin of this? Well, as I mentioned, in the Law of the Sea Convention, the original text, it says basically the Council has to unanimously adopt regulations. Those negotiations were concluded in 1982. Most developed countries, in fact, all of them except Iceland, did not ratify the Law of the Sea Convention because of the seabed mining provisions. They thought it gave too much away to developing countries. The United States felt it was too socialist when the Reagan administration took power in 1981, et cetera, and so forth. And so when they realized that the Law of the Sea would enter into force, become legally binding which it did in 1994, the United States, and as I understand it, West Germany, amongst others, made a move to change some of those provisions. And one of those provisions was this 2-year rule. And the rationale was basically that the U.S. was saying, you developing countries, because there has to be regional representation amongst the membership of the Council of the ISA, you developing countries can prevent us from ever mining by simply not agreeing to adopt the regulations. So we want a new rule inserted into the Law of the Sea Convention, which they did through the so-called 1994 Part 11 agreement, that says if a country is ready to go mining, if a country's company or the country itself is ready to go mining, they can notify the International Seabed Authority that they intend to apply for a license. And the International Seabed Authority has 2 years to the Council, to adopt the regulations so that they can apply for a license under fully fledged regulations. And if the Council hasn't done that in 2 years, then the company or the country can apply for a mining license, and the Council must consider and provisionally approve that application for a license.
Okay.
And so, as Farah mentioned, the 2-year rule was triggered in July, basically, 2021. It expired in 2023. And the metals company was the one that triggered it. They got Nauru to trigger it for them because they needed this to convince investors to invest in the company, because the investors were starting to realize, wait a minute, but we're hearing that unless all 36 members of the Council agree to this, you're never going to get a license. And so they triggered it, and it was common knowledge actually about a year and a half before they did this.
But Matt,
where the debate lies right now is how is the Council going to handle an application under this 2-year rule? And the law is working against folks, against saying no to this. I mentioned the voting structure. This is a really, really problematic issue for the ISA. But the Council has basically begun reinterpreting what that particular clause means if the regulations aren't in place. And so, for example, they agreed in 2023, nobody should get a license without regulations in place. But it's a should, not a shall.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of legal maneuvering. And there are countries, such as China and Norway, that really want to see the metals company get a license, so that opens it up for everybody else.
Sets a precedent for everyone else.
Exactly.
As we let this sink in, let's look at this marine snow behind us. Yeah, your favorite, Dan.
Yes. I actually never saw it. Is it?
Is it this? Must be this, right?
Bubbles?
Oh, it's maybe
looks like
just
bubbles, I think,
Okay.
yeah.
Never mind.
I didn't picture it like this.
No. It's not this.
In my version, there was an occasional whale carcass.
But I mean, I feel I just sat through like a very interesting law school lecture, and I'm kind of struggling to understand like what are we to do right now? Should we just like postpone this process as long as possible, both the mining code and the 2-year rule, just make sure that every time we find something that postpones it by another 2 years, or is there a way we can just say like, no, we're not going to do this deep sea mining? Farah and Matt, you both want to say something about this?
Well, our analysis is, working with lawyers and so forth, is that the assembly of the ISA has the authority to set a so-called general policy for the organization overall. So for the Secretariat of the ISA, for this thing called the Legal and Technical Commission that I mentioned, and for the Council. And that doesn't require a consensus. It requires a 2/3 majority vote. So to the extent that there are countries now calling for a moratorium, and there are a number of other countries that are actually calling for basically making the same arguments that countries that are calling for a moratorium are making, without actually using the term moratorium or precautionary pause. And one of the main arguments,
I feel we're using
a
lot of like, it's quite dense, but maybe just to go back to indeed, like, what is it that we're aiming for right now?
Basically, for countries to agree to suspend any sort of, to agree not to issue any mining licenses for at least the next 10 or 20 years, if you want to put a time bound, or maybe longer, and to set some parameters. So until there is much better understanding of the ecosystems within which these mining operations would operate, and to form the basis of informed decisions, and to meet the obligation to ensure prevention of damage to the flora and fauna, there should be no mining. And this is
Farah,
something that,
I would love to
this
hear
is something
your...
a number of states have actually argued, that they cannot ensure that the ISA meets its environmental obligations if we go mining in the absence of good science and comprehensive understanding.
Farah.
No, I just want to say, it's just basically summarizing what's been said, but it's clear that the ISA is not ready or able or fit for purpose to undertake such massive responsibility of ensuring that the high seas, or the area, the deep sea, is sufficiently protected for the benefit of humankind. And with that knowledge, we should say, well, we need to look at the ISA, reform it, bring it into the 21st century. It was negotiated in the last century. Things like the climate crisis, things like nature, wildlife loss were not part of that negotiation. And we know that it's not transparent. I mean, I would recommend that if you want to want to watch a sort of hilarious light take on what we've been talking about here, do watch the John Oliver show. He's a British comedian based out of the US, but he took all this information that we've been talking about tonight and more, and he has actually presented it in quite a hilarious format. But what he has done is also expose the ISA and the Secretariat of the ISA and the kind of nefarious practices that the ISA basically undertakes, and the secrecy that Matt was talking about. And I think as global citizens, we should be like, well, wait a minute, this is not something that, a handful of companies can negotiate on my behalf. The global commons, the high seas, belong to all of us. We should all be raising our voice. And as a campaigner, that's what I do. I advocate for, as Matt does as well, I advocate for a moratorium is a very technical word, but we're simply not ready. We can't afford this experiment in our last sort of pristine wilderness, if you like, because we can't reverse it either. We can't say after the fact, oh, well, that wasn't a good idea. We only have one planet. So that's what I'm trying to do with the Ocean Hope expedition, which is my next step to really bring this campaign to where on the road, but also to meet people where they're at. Because I see, just looking in this room, there's so much information here, right? And we're quite technical, quite legal, quite everything else. But what we really need to do, and what's missing, is understanding what our perception is of the ocean, where each one of us, what our relationship is with the ocean, meet people where they're at, and then explain what that connection is to the deep sea. Because only if we are all informed can we, because we are the benefit of humankind, that's us, can we say to our elected officials what we think should or shouldn't happen on the high seas. This shouldn't be something for a handful of companies that want to get rich. So that's what I want to do, and I would very much urge you to visit theoceanandus.org and the Ocean Hope Expedition and join us, because we can't do it without you. We really need everybody to speak up. I mean, Matt and I have been talking about this for years, but it's a tireless, thankless job that we cannot do on our own. So please do join our movement and support our work.
Yeah, thank you for that plea, and thank you for your dedication all these years, indeed. And of course, you're completely right. And, okay, we need more time. We're not ready. We probably don't want it at all. But how? Like, what are some of the ways that we can actually influence? You say, of course, like raise awareness and raise our voices. But maybe what are some of the ways we can just block this? Perhaps, or is that not really possible and we just need to
No, I mean, last year I launched a petition and that, gathered over 340,000 signatures, and many other organizations have petitions. And, that way we at least get our elected officials and our parliamentarians to discuss this issue, because it's happening on the high seas. It's not an election topic, right? Because it doesn't concern our sovereign space.
Right, yeah.
But that's what we can do individually: sign those petitions, support those organizations, talk about this issue, and understand that everything is connected, right? It isn't just something that's happening out there. The deep sea impacts all of us. Mm-hmm. Every second breath we take comes from the ocean. So just think about that. We always think about the lungs of the earth being the rainforests. Actually, the oceans are just as much our lungs. And we can't keep, we just can't, anyway, I don't want to repeat myself. We can't.
Yeah, and that's very clear. I guess I'm looking for, because it feels like a machine that's kind of ongoing, and at some point it's gonna,
Yeah, but one thing we have successfully done, us and many others, is we have already delayed that decision, right? We have already opened this discussion. The fact that we're sitting here tonight means that there's enough interest to even think about this. Hey, we need an informed discussion. We need more science. And one thing just about the ISA as well, there is a clause in the ISA. Matt can tell you probably exactly where it is, but there is a clause that says that we have to reform the ISA. There is an obligation to look at the ISA, review the ISA every 5 years, I think it is. And last year, that 5 years was, I think even before that was up. And I think one state, Germany, they couldn't try to table that on the agenda by saying, hey, we need to review the ISA. And it was blocked. That agenda item was blocked. I think this year they're going to pick it up again. I don't know. But these are things we can also insist on. Let's modernize this system. And until we are absolutely satisfied with the criteria being met, let's leave the ocean, the deep sea. Let's not start deep sea mining. Look at how polarized our world is today. How are we ever going to collaborate effectively? And if we start mining next year?
Yeah, clear. Thank you, Farah. So indeed, you're talking about legal reform, about citizen engagement, meeting people where they're at. I wonder if Dan and René, especially, and I'll come back to you as well, Matt, have ideas about what are we to do?
Well, me personally, as a journalist, I think I will. I find this topic very fascinating because of all the geopolitics, the environmental issues, the questions that science still has to answer. But for me as a journalist, I think I will supply my readers, I hope, with valuable information. So I will keep following this discussion and write about the topic. For example, one of the things that I'm very interested about right now is mitigation measures, for example. You could oppose it, but you could also think, well, what if we are going to do it? How could we best do it? So, for example, some areas have been cut off from the maps, so as to nature reserve areas. I don't know the official name, but you cannot mine there, and it cannot have any negative influences. yeah, is it enough? I don't know. I think as a journalist, I should just follow it.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll just be crunching numbers, and models, and making, calculating the amount that we need and what we can also get from other mines, and showing up at these panels to explain that we don't really need it.
Yeah.
Well, my suggestion is, I mean, the Netherlands actually plays a very prominent role in the negotiations at the ISA. To use an American expression, I think it punches way above its weight. And it's because the Netherlands was in a special class of countries called the pioneer investors. So it sits on one of the key political groups within the Council of the ISA, and is actively engaged in the process. So you can raise these issues with parliamentarians. You can get parliamentarians to ask questions of the government in the parliament and the Tweede Kamer. The government adopted a position just before the elections. Not just before the elections, a little bit before the
Last
elections.
year.
Before the collapse of
The coalition, right? Yeah. And where it spelled out its position, which a number of folks in the coalition did not particularly, aspects of which we didn't agree with. For example, one of the things that the coalition that's in the current government position is that the Netherlands is considering becoming a sponsoring state, meaning a country that would actually sponsor a company to get an exploration license. And they're under pressure from some of the companies here in the Netherlands to actually do that. Companies that want to actually do the mining itself, companies that want to build the technology to sell to the deep seabed mining industry. And so there's a role for citizens here, and it could translate into quite an influential, quite some influence in the International Seabed Authority discussions. The Netherlands has also put forward a lot of very strong proposals, good conservation proposals at the ISA in the past as well. Some of which
maybe
are carried,
that links to my last question before I open the floor up to you again for last round. Is in the scenario that indeed next year there will be a mining code. You're both like, no.
There is so much that has to be done, and countries are so far apart on so many issues. The royalty regime, the mining inspectorate, whether it should be the Council of the ISA or it should the states members or the Legal and Technical Commission that would oversee compliance. And what are they going to need to do to actually be able to monitor these mining operations at 4,000 or 5,000 meters depth to ensure that the mining companies are actually operating in compliance with whatever regulations are agreed, et cetera, and so forth. There's so much that needs to be done. Most people are saying, look, we're not going to get an agreement in 2025 But again, the two-year rule thing, that's the big question mark.
Yeah.
And what Dan was saying, the metals company is pushing for it. They could just say, screw what's happening, we're going to go.
Yeah.
I mean,
what's the chance?
But then there's
what do you think is the chance that that's going to happen?
I was going to answer another question actually, but
does anyone have an answer to this question?
Many countries have said that they would not support a rush decision if Norway or the metals company would actually.
You're talking about the 2-year rules.
Yeah. So I don't know, but my estimate would be that it would not have a big effect.
Okay.
It's for me at least it's 50-50 at this point.
So 50-50 that it could happen.
Yeah. We'll see. But that's, again, part of the big decision making. The big decisions are going to have to be made over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Because the metals company has said we will apply in the second half of 2024. They actually said they intended to apply in 2023. Then they pushed that application back to after the conclusion of the 2-year period. And then once those negotiations took place in 2023, they decided to postpone for another year.
So the pressure is definitely on, and the counter pressure is very needed.
And it's an existential issue for the metals company. Unlike some of the other big companies that have licenses, Lockheed Martin, for example, had a license for 10 years. Then they decided to get back out of it. They sold off their subsidiary to a startup company in Norway. GSR, the Belgian company, it's a subsidiary of DEME, the big dredging and offshore wind installation group. They basically said, and this is Dan, you pulled that out in one of your your articles, that Chris Benayan, the CEO, said we're just going to suspend further development of the technology until we see what happens at the ISA.
Yeah.
You had another big company pull out, but the metals company is in there, and their partner Allseas. But can I just come back to just one question that wasn't answered?
I would love to bring in the new questions because we're kind of running out of time a little bit.
Okay. But
so I would love to, if it's like in one sentence, then
very quickly. The metals company, the U.S. Geological Survey says there are 20 billion tons of nodules in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. The metals company says we have 900 million tons in their claim areas. They have 3 claim areas. The only company that's actually managed to mine to date is at 3 million tons per year, it would take them 300 years to mine that 900 million tons. But when we look at what they've mined to date, Allseas brought up 3,000 tons in a 2-month expedition. So this industry is very far from being able to get
from that
this 900 million
effective,
tons.
let's say. Thank you. All right, we had the 2 questions here. We have another one, or is your question answered already? Yeah. Well, it's your time to shine. And please keep the questions brief as well.
Yes, what will happen, how the court case will look like if we give the deep sea rights? And another question, is this discussion useful because we signed up yesterday the European Nature Restore Law, not compensating, restoring. So stop all the bullshit.
Statement and a question in one. Shall we pick up some other questions and see? Yeah?
I'm Paul Dinkum. I'm chair of the Visserbescherming, a Dutch foundation for the protection of fish. And it's strange, as I said, it's for the protection of mankind. It's strange if humans are superior to other animals, and I think we are that far that the animals who live down there in the deep sea can decide on their own how they want to live. And that humans don't go interfering there, as we did as humans on all kinds of places on Earth. And I think we should stop and see that they have their own rights. They are
exactly
rights like humans have rights. Also, these fishes and other
rights to their own environment. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, can I just quickly say something to that? I mean,
sure.
I can't say anything other than I completely agree with you. We need to give the deep sea rights, just like we're starting to do that with other natural entities. But also, what's I think very important is that we, and this is a longer discussion, but we have to recognize deep sea mining as ecocide. Right, and so this is something I'm seeing Lammert in the room over there. That this is something that that we're fighting for, right? To get ecocide adopted by the Rome statutes as the 5th international crime, alongside genocide and the other 3 international crimes. If ecocide is adopted as the 5th crime, it will be much easier to also hold entities to account. Again, it's the high seas, so it's still, in my view, it's an impossible task. But just to echo, absolutely, we need to give them rights. This isn't just about humans; it's also about our fellow beings. And the other thing that you asked about the herstelwet, I mean that's a European thing, but. I don't know how we would apply that to the high seas, but we could, for sure, remind our governments that they've agreed to this and that this shouldn't just end at our borders.
Yeah. Thank you. Are there people who did not ask questions yet that have a question? 2 people here.
I have a question on the impact of deep sea mining. It was already a bit touched upon by Daan, but I understood there were talks about conservation areas or reserves where in this Clarion-Clipperton zone where no mining would be there. What's your opinion on that? What can you say about that?
Yeah. So if mining would start, then what does that mean? Who wants to answer that?
I can take a quick crack at it. There are 13 of these reserve areas in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. They're called areas of particular environmental interest. They're basically, with 2 exceptions, about 160,000 square kilometers. They occupy close to 2 million square kilometers of the 4.5 million square kilometers of the Clarion-Clipperton zone. However, they're designed to protect a core area that's about a quarter of the size of the overall area closed to mining. So these 13 areas are closed to any mining licenses, but you see mining licenses, exploration all up against the boundaries of these areas. And they have a 100-kilometer buffer zone to protect a core area of 40,000 square kilometers. So in fact, what they're trying to protect or designed to protect is about 8% of the Clarion-Clipperton zone, as opposed to 44% of the Clarion-Clipperton zone. But, you know, I mean, for me, I first got into this when with scientists working through a science-based project funded by the European Union, and a number of scientists were trying to design a similar type of areas of protected, you know, particular environmental interest for the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, the ridge system that runs north-south through the Atlantic, from the Arctic to the Antarctic. And there are a number of claim areas to mine so-called hydrothermal vent deposits. And so the scientists were trying to design a so-called regional environment management plan that would have these no-go areas. And as one of the big debates we got into was, well, how much should we protect? 30%, 50%? How do you protect representative areas of ecosystem, species, and habitats? And I remember thinking, but why are we talking about how much we're going to protect? Why aren't we talking about how much we're willing to lose in the first place, and why?
Right, yeah,
What is the justification for this? You know, why not 90% protection or 95% protection?
You wanted to add something, Farhad?
I think that's the kind of the way I look at it, because you're basically protecting 44%. That's great. It's better than nothing. It's a lot better than nothing, but you still risk losing a hell of a lot if you mine 54.
Yeah, clear.
56 rather.
No, I just wanted to add, and this is something that I never thought I would do ever, is come up for the fishing industry, industrial fishing industry. You know, we're talking about beings that are impacted, you know, irreversible damage to ancient ecosystems and all of that. But last year, for the first time in, you know, my 20 years of working on ocean conservation, I had the industrial fishing industry ask me to come and explain deep sea mining and why they should be concerned. And there are a couple of qualitative studies out there that show that deep sea mining is going to have a huge impact on industrial fishing. And these are just, because we're just coming back to the initial thing, you know, what are the impacts of deep sea mining? There's also impacts to cultural heritage, historical, indigenous, you know, knowledge of these areas. I mean, this goes beyond the beings down there and beyond the you know, the things we don't know. It's also things that we depend on today in our livelihoods that will be impacted.
Yeah, thanks for adding that. One more question we had, and I wonder if I promised you I would come back. Yeah, you can ask it over a drink, perhaps. No, the gentleman behind you. Sorry, yeah. You couldn't know. Yeah.
Thank you, neighbor. It might have been touched upon very slightly, but has it ever been considered just to use the power of, for example, the whole European market, as we have in other areas as well, just to block any influence from deep sea mining into our economy, like the big the platforms like Meta? We can control them more or less by the rules that we have, how they should behave on our market. Isn't that a model that we could use to prevent deep sea mining from coming into the European market, and therefore, try to stop or ban?
Make it less of a profitable idea.
Yeah, instead
to do
of telling them it's not good for us, because we told them already that oil is not good for us, and while we still use it. And
René, do you have maybe thoughts about this?
I think most of the companies that were mentioned that already said that they didn't want to use those materials are European companies to a large extent, I think. And I think, yes, in principle, we could do this, just like we are looking for responsible sourced raw materials. That's one of the key issues also in the Critical Raw Material Act. And so yes, in principle, we could set in, basically, yes, we could do that.
Yeah, and
I think that's the answer.
The European Parliament, they have already voted in favor of a moratorium on deep sea mining, and then there are individual states. But yes, it's complicated getting the entire bloc to sort of in unison say no to deep sea mining.
You are you're saying that maybe the European Union could do like prohibit importing these metals. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Okay. So that would be slightly different.
Moratorium.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, although to mention, we did fight that battle in the recent adoption of the Critical Raw Materials Act of the European Union, and we didn't get an agreement that there should be no deep sea bed metals imported into the European Union. We also worked on the battery.
The battery directive?
Yeah, well, no, not the actual legislation itself. And again, there are companies lobbying for keeping that option open for deep sea bed metals. They're active in Brussels as well, and so there is quite a political battle. But where we lost the stronger language that we were hoping for was at the level of the Council of the European Union. The member states wouldn't agree to that. Parliament was more or less on side. In fact, it was, so that's where the challenge is. And there are some EU member states that are interested in mining.
René, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as often in these types of cases where it's about sustainability issues, the Parliament is much more progressive, let's say, than
has been. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. Wow, it seems like we've come to the end of our hour and a half together. Although, of course, this is just scratching the surface of this complex but incredibly urgent and important topic. Matt can't.
Well, I just want to say
can't accept the end of the conversation.
The idea of a moratorium on deep sea bed mining, there is a precedent for this, and that's Antarctica. And in the 1980s, the member countries of the Antarctic Treaty System, of which the Netherlands was one, and still is, were negotiating a treaty to open up the Antarctic continent to mining. And in the late 1980s, France, then Australia said, wait a minute, this is not a good idea. We want a moratorium on this. And they were successful in getting an agreement of the...
Right, so it's been done before, is your point,
50-year moratorium and a high bar that has to be reached before that moratorium is overturned. And think of the prescience of that. And this is what we're asking for. Antarctica now is so important for our understanding of how the world is changing under the impacts of climate change.
Yeah.
And what the countries agreed to at that time was we're going to set aside Antarctica for peaceful purposes and scientific purposes. If we can do the same for the deep sea, given how important the deep sea is as the world's largest carbon sink, not just the deep sea, but the open ocean, that could show a certain maturity on the part of our political leadership, such as it is. If the 168 countries, and it's a question of political will, there are no legal obstacles to doing this, were to say, let's do a moratorium, let's put a lot of effort into researching and understanding what these ecosystems and what this part of the ocean does for us as humankind, how much we're going to need it, and how much we need to be careful about interfering with it in order to best survive the next 30, 40, 50 years of climate change. That would be a responsible decision on the part of the collective nations of the world. And that could give us at least some hope as humanity that maybe we'll see more of that kind of thing.
Maybe we'll become a little bit smarter.
In other issues such as climate change.
Yeah. Thank you for that spark of hope, actually. Sorry? Yes, good. Brussels is watching, I'm sure. If I just summarize everything that we went through the motions this evening, starting with indeed life at the deep sea. Although it's cold and there's a lot of pressure and it's dark, it's actually full of life and full of magical life that we don't actually understand quite yet. So this deep sea mining, well, first of all, do we need it? Not really. It's not. It doesn't add that much. Plus, it's way too slow to actually support the energy transition. And the damage is incredible, right? Like the direct damage to the creatures in the habitat, the damage to the ocean as a carbon sink, the pollution, light pollution, sound pollution, just general pollution of the sediment. It's impossible to hold parties accountable. It will damage our incentive for a circular economy. It also has to do with the need culture, indigenous knowledge, etc. So on so many levels, there's so much potential damage, potentially right around the corner. And why would we do that anyway? Just purely for profit, indeed. Strategic independence. Compete a little bit more cheaply. So I'm happy that we spent quite some time speaking about the ways forward in terms of we need legal reform of these not so democratic people at the ISA. We need awareness, like you're all working on actually. Right now, we need citizen engagement. We need to call our representatives about it because it's not on national agendas. We need to maybe take a rights-based approach and call it ecocide, call it what it is, support moratoria around this from governments, from companies. So really bring this issue into the light, actually. And the pressure is on, so let's bring it on the other side as well. Is what I hear you all say. So thank you so much to all of you for sharing your knowledge, and thank you all for being so actively present and asking so many questions and making the discussion even deeper. Keep an eye on the work of these 4 wonderful people, Dan, Farah, René, and Matthew. Let's keep following you to stay updated and do our part. And these events at Pakhuis de Zwijger, as you know, are always free to join, and everyone's welcome to join. These conversations are way too important. But you can support Pakhuis in these conversations as well by becoming a friend. You can donate once or yearly, and whatever amount that is possible for you. And we, of course, hope to welcome you again very soon here. For now, let's have a drink, talk some more, and have a great evening.